Hey everybody, welcome to the In All Things podcast. It's time to see God in everything. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the In All Things podcast. My name is Mitch Frost.
My name is Steve Markle.
And today we are back at the table where we have these conversations.
Yes, we are.
So
you are here. You thought maybe you wouldn't be this week, but you're back.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
I did think that last week we were going to have the baby, but
I
we did
know.
not, so we're
I
here.
know.
But not only that, every time we have a Monday off, we end up at this table.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Well, there's been a few, yes.
Don't think so. If we are currently recording the podcast and we have a Monday off for a holiday, we end up here.
It's happened a few times.
It's not true. More than a few times. Anyway, so how was Sunday yesterday?
It was good. The services went well. It was another great crowd in the morning. I enjoyed the 11 more than the 9:30. There was more energy there. The crowd's been. We've seen a lot of growth in the last month, but it's all been at 11, and 9:30's been the same. So you just feel the energy when it's more packed in there. So that was awesome. The worship was great. The new song was great. So anyway, really had a good morning. And then how about you? Last night I heard from my teenage son that it was pretty awesome. The time of worship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How'd you feel about it?
I was curious. What did he say was awesome? Was just
He said the worship was awesome. He said that had three girls singing, and they did a great job.
Mm-hmm.
And you had Cam back playing guitar with them because John was sick, and he said that you gave them opportunities, kind of like what's happening in our culture at the college campuses, like with Asbury. You gave them some more opportunities to pray, maybe at the altar or pray with someone. He said you had an opportunity to go pray for a particular person. You have a wall where everybody's signed their name that's ever come, and you could go to that wall and put your hand on their name and pray for them. So he thought just those elements were really cool. It was more maybe less scripted. Not that you're always scripted, but you know how our services are. You have a plan, and I think it was more open-ended like that for God to move and work. And he just thought that was his reaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it was a different night for us. So yesterday morning, got a text from John, who runs a lot of our student worship stuff, that he was pretty sick. And so without him, unfortunately, where we are right now, if we don't have somebody else, we can't do worship because he's the only one that really plays instruments.
Mm-hmm.
So we have plenty of vocalists, but we don't have anybody besides him that really plays anything.
Yeah, one of the girls that's a good vocalist for you, her parents are in my small group, and they were saying that she at one point thought that she was going to have to sing a cappella, and she was like, I'm not doing that.
No.
Not comfortable.
And so, I just texted him. Those of you who don't know Cam, he used to work here part-time and did a lot of our student worship stuff. And so just sent a text to him and just said, hey, I don't know what you're doing tonight, but if you would want to come and just kind of lead and play guitar and just be there. And they said, yeah. So it was awesome to have them back, and students were excited to see them. And, we just kind of had this open moment of worship where we just, for about 10, 15 minutes, we just kind of prayed and laid hands on the wall of names that we hadn't seen in a while, or we didn't know where they were, or what was going on in their lives, and prayed with each other and confessed, and it was awesome. It was a special night, and trying to create more room for things like that, because some students aren't comfortable with praying and with those different kind of things. So we're just trying to get more comfortable with that kind of stuff.
That's good.
So
really good.
It was a good night.
That's good.
And then preached on being single, which is one of the things that gets me really excited to talk about. So that was fun too.
You should unpack that a little bit more. You get excited to talk about being single.
I do, because I think that it's really a big misconception in the church world, and just a lot of our culture as a whole. There's a lot of scripture on being single, and Paul says, I think it's better to be single than to be married.
For him,
he says, I wish everybody was. And we just skip over those passages, and we rush people into relationships and into marriages. And if people are single, we, as quickly as we can, we try to get them into a relationship, dating people. And it's just not the point of life. And it's something that gets me really fired up, because I know personally single people who are older, and it's really hard for them to be in church services and be a part of series where they feel like, well, I'm single and everybody's looking down on me. And that's how it's communicated a lot of time.
Right.
Not specifically here, but in general, like Big C church, that it is like, you're single.
Right.
Let's fix that. It's not always a problem.
I always struggle with the series is when we are calling it a series like we have right now, The Gods of Marriage. I'm like, immediately I feel like if you're single, you feel like, well, this series isn't for me, or it'll be a series that'll make me feel bad for not having that person in my life. And I don't know, yesterday, I mean, and I think throughout the series, I'm intentionally trying to make sure I say, if you're single, I mean, there's still application. There's still, and I think God didn't create any of us to live and do life alone.
No,
and you're not saying that. I think that we need close relationships in our life, whether it's marriage or others. We need that. We're not made to be alone. So it's so important that we apply those principles. But singleness is another whole topic that is kind of not talked about very much.
Yeah, I just think it gets neglected. And so I think, for a room full of high school students that are feeling that pressure from their parents and feeling the need to go date and go find somebody. And,
right.
I got to, oh my gosh, I'm not complete until I have somebody. It's something that I like to step into pretty much every year.
I like that. I'm glad you do that, because I see that with students where there's friend groups where maybe there's 4 or 5 guys and 4 out of the 5 have a girlfriend, and the one that doesn't feels like something's wrong with him right now.
Yeah.
And that can easily change in a heartbeat where 3 of them are single and 1 has it's just like that in high school. And then, I know plenty of people that are in their 20s here in our church that struggle with this. And it's a tough place to be.
It's like, and it's not popular to say, but some people are called to be single potentially for their entire life. Like it's,
never know.
You don't know, but it's just, it gets me, fired up. But anyway, so we talked about that last night, and that was a good, so it was a good night overall. Good Sunday.
That's good. Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So today, a couple minutes here.
Yeah.
I just want to spend some time. We've been in relationships at our church here on the podcast. A lot of churches are in relationship type series right now. So we've been kind of having some one-off conversations here on this podcast, broader than marriage, but just about relationships in general. So today we're going to do that again. We're going to talk about something that Jesus talks about in terms of our relationships and how we should treat other people. And today we're talking about relationships with people that we don't like. And so I want to just read through some of his words that are pretty convicting, and we're going to break it down a little bit, and we're going to go from there.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yeah.
So Matthew 5, Jesus is preaching to the crowd here, and he's going through one of my personal favorite kind of like sections is his "You've heard it said, but I say." So he kind of goes through these different statements of saying, you've heard it said, or you've read it. And what he's kind of trying to say is in the Old Testament, it says X, Y, and Z, but I say, and he's not contradicting it. He's not changing what the Old Testament says. He's not doing any of those things. That's some people get kind of hung up on that. Like Jesus came just to change what the Old Testament says. No, not really true. But he's adding to it to make it make more sense. He's expanding it. He's helping us the people understand kind of how they were doing it wrong, all that kind of stuff. And so he's going through these "you've heard it said, but I say" statements. And then Matthew 5:43, I'm going to read a couple verses here. He says, "You've heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as a true child of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." This is a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's nearly impossible to read that section and not feel like a bit of a gut punch.
Sure.
Because there's multiple things he's trying to touch on here, which we'll kind of break it down maybe verse by verse almost. But this is hard scripture. Like this
it is. Yeah.
This is convicting scripture to read, especially as we've been talking and spending so much time on relationships and how we treat other people. What Jesus is saying is, okay, you do really well at loving people that love you back, and you do really well at loving, your spouses and friends and whoever, but anybody can do that.
Right.
You're not special for that. That's basically what he's saying. There's nothing really, great because you're doing that. And he's saying anybody who doesn't believe in me or doesn't have a relationship with God can do that too. So what sets you apart and makes you think that that's all that there is, right? And so, any initial thoughts on this Matthew 5 section?
Well, yeah, I think that, it's very convicting. I think it's, the first thing I think is let's define what enemies means, because he used the word enemies. And I'm curious how we define that word, because we're supposed to love our enemies. In my mind, I don't want to think that I even have enemies. And my initial thought is, who are my enemies? Because I don't feel like I go through life thinking you're my friend, and then if you're not my friend, then you're automatic my enemy. So where do you think Jesus was going with that, or in the context that he was preaching that? What do you think he meant by enemies?
I think it can be a couple different things. I think the time he was writing in was probably a little bit different to where there was a lot more persecution, and
Correct.
there was a lot more of literal enemies that were against what they were saying.
Right?
Right?
The Romans were their enemies.
So I do think that has to be taken into account, where when Jesus was writing and the people who were listening, when he said enemies, they probably knew exactly who he was talking about. Oh, there's people who will kill us and put us in jail, and right. And so I think there's that. But I also think it's as dramatic as the word enemies is.
Right.
I think it's just kind of this idea of those who are against you, those who are moving in a different direction as you, those who don't believe what you believe, those on the opposite side of whatever you want to say. I would say that those are your enemies.
Okay.
But I think that word is so
it sounds so dramatic. Yeah, like you said, the word dramatic. I think because I don't think of the people that don't go to Sycamore or disagree with our doctrine or disagree with our statement of faith or our beliefs. I don't think of them as necessarily my enemies.
Right.
I think of those as people that just believe differently, that I love and treat the way that Jesus would want me to treat them. And that's really what he's saying. Those people that are different thinkers than you, that are against the gospel, they're our enemies. We don't use that word, but I think we know where we're going with this.
Yeah.
So, I think we have to figure out how to flesh that out. What does that mean? What does it mean to actually love them and live that in a day-to-day way? Like, what is that?
Right.
How? So is that what you're asking me to do? No.
That's just kind of where we have to go.
Yeah.
But I think the starting point is this, and we're just going to throw it out here. When's the last time that you, and I'm going to answer this too, have prayed for your enemy, prayed for somebody who is against you in life?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because if it was turned on me and you asked me that question, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, prayed for them. Yeah, that's a tough one. And it's hard because I have to get my mind wrapped around people, thinking of people as my enemies, because I think of people that I meet that I don't think are believers, and I don't think they're my enemy. But sometimes I'll say a quick prayer in my head, like, man, I pray that they come to know the Lord, or that something brings them to Christ, or that the walls break down for a conversation. But I can't. I'm not gonna sit here and make up something specific that I can tell you, like, oh yeah, last week there was this person that was an enemy of mine that I prayed for.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I think reading the specific. There's really no getting around what Jesus is saying here. He's pretty blunt about it. And so I think when you read that and then you look at your own life and you go, oh, when's the last time I've done that? And we can't think of one example.
Yeah, I think of things like I read, on Twitter, of people that are making all kinds of comments that I just want. Sometimes I feel like they're my enemies because of people like criticizing in the recent days, criticizing the Asbury revival, criticizing the He Gets Us commercials, criticizing the Chosen TV show. We've talked about these things. People that are like that, that come after it, sometimes on the side of God, sometimes on the side of anti-God. And I look at them as people who are just critical people, and I don't think they're my friends. I also don't think I want to pray for them. I just think I want to punch them sometimes, because they're jerks. They're being jerks.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Does that have?
Yeah. I think it's just more of the mindset that has to change, right? Because I see those things too. Especially with everything we have going around. You just mentioned three pretty big things that get a lot of crap from both sides of the conversation, right? And it's like you open social media and it's flooded with awesome testimonies and pictures and things of all these things that we just mentioned. And then on the same side, you open Twitter or go wherever, and you see constant people just putting it down and being cynical, and here's why it's not real, and here's why it's based on this, and here's why it's so easy to buy into that sometimes.
Right.
It's so easy to like let that influence your mind, and then the next time you see a picture of Asbury, you see a picture of this, you're like, oh, but actually they're doing this. But then it's like, it's I don't know.
I mean, I read one tweet from Ed Stetzer saying that I'd rather be gullible than skeptical. And sometimes in life, we're so skeptical of everything that we miss out on what God's doing. And it's easy, though, to fall in that. And if you surround yourself with those type of people that are skeptical, and you hear anything, you're like, yeah, right. It can be that way even about something happening, even in our church or even in your ministry or anything that's happening. Like, oh, yeah, that person just repented. Yeah, they'll probably be back and doing it tomorrow. That's awful. That's an awful way to live.
Yeah.
And so, we're probably rabbit trailing a little bit away from the whole context of this passage. But I think he's addressing something that's hard for us to do. That's not natural. And I think we talked about, it's funny, it's not the exact same thing, but we talked about it in my small group last night, all married couples. So I went away from what I planned and said, let's just talk about the sermons that we've been preaching the last few weeks and with our group. And then I showed a clip from a pastor who wrote a book called Love and Respect. And it was talking about the crazy cycle that we get in husband and wives with our arguments, where we argue over things that aren't maybe all that important, but more than anything, a husband wants to be respected by his wife, and more than anything, a wife wants to be loved by her husband. Going back to the Ephesians 5 passage. But my point is, Jesus didn't, or Paul didn't in that passage, command wives to love their husbands better, and didn't command husbands to respect their wives better. The problem or the issue is that women don't struggle with showing love. Men struggle with showing love. Not that women don't need to show love, but the point being is a lot of times when Paul addresses something or when Jesus addresses something, they're addressing the hard thing that is not natural for us to do. And in our world that we live in, it is just so natural, the same as it was 2,000 years ago, to just buddy up with all of our best friends, with all people that think the same way, and love on them because it's easy and it's simple, just like every single person can do in this world. And that doesn't make us godly. That just makes us like the world, because everybody just finds their circles and does that. So it is definitely Jesus calling us to the hard things. And sometimes we think, oh, it's easier because we don't have to follow the law of the Old Testament. No, Jesus makes everything harder, right? More challenging.
Yep.
To be like him.
Yep. I've heard a perspective on, a lot of people like to say it's not a religion, it's a relationship.
Sure.
That's a really cool thing to say, right? And I heard a perspective recently of like, that's cute and that's great and it's true.
Right.
But a relationship is so much harder. A relationship is so much harder because religion is a checklist. It's a checklist. Religion is a set. Okay, I know what I need to do, exactly how to do it to be good to go. A relationship, you're stepping into walking personally, walking daily, committing yourself to this person, this being. We believe that God has preferences and he has characteristics, and he's a person and he's personal and he's intimate and he has all these things. And so you're buying into all of that and you're getting to know him and you're learning from him and to be in a relationship with him, you're submitting yourself to his preferences. That's so much harder. That's so much harder.
Yeah.
So that's a great saying, and some people write that off as like, well, it's not a religion, it's a relationship. And that's basically the way of saying I can do whatever I want. Well, it's not true.
No.
Because we're so good at talking about the sinner's cross, right? We're so good at talking about what Jesus did for us on the cross,
right.
But we're really, really, really bad at addressing the believer's cross. We're really, really bad at addressing the fact that we have to carry a cross.
What does that mean
day.
when he says, take up your cross and follow?
Right. It means that we're entering into this life of, because of what Jesus has done, we're willing to kind of buy into long suffering. Hey, I don't know what I'm going to carry. I don't know what the day-to-day life is going to bring me, but I'm going to carry my cross every day and not do what's natural, which is what you're talking about, because of what Jesus did for me, supernaturally on the cross, right? Yeah. And so I think this passage we're talking about right here, though, is a great example of that. But a lot of what Jesus talks about is a great example of that. He's not calling you to just do what's natural. Right?
Right.
It's a practice. It's going to require, and this is actually a perfect way for this conversation to go, because the way that he ends this whole section, it says, "But you are to be perfect, as my Father in heaven is perfect." And we've broken that down before,
Right.
but that's going to take work. That's going to take you buying into this whole thing, daily, carrying your cross, getting better at it, working out that spiritual muscle, getting stronger, sensing him more, hearing his voice more, all these things, right? So it's not natural, but the more you walk in it, the more you, the more you draw closer to him, remain in him, you grow in the fruit of the Spirit, all these things, it becomes who you are. But it's not naturally who you are. Right? I mean, Jesus doesn't call us to just go on living the way that you've always lived. And I think that's what we want to believe, because that's easy. But a lot of what you read in passages just like this, which are about how you treat other people, that's not natural, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and I think if we look at it and wonder where Jesus was going with this, and we're supposed to become like him, so what did he do in loving enemies? What are some examples of Jesus loving enemies? I mean, if he's telling us to do something, he's not telling us to do something that he's not doing. So who were his enemies, and how did he love them?
I mean, there's a lot, right?
Yeah, but there is. I mean, immediately think of people like Zacchaeus. I think of the woman at the well. I mean, they were people that were not necessarily at him, against him, but they were skeptics, or they were non-believers. But then I also think of the Pharisees. He wasn't necessarily friendly to them, would you say?
No, I wouldn't say he was friendly, but I would say that he was trying to love them.
Right.
Because
so
he was trying
that's
to
what I was thought you said, and that's what and that's why I think this whole idea is very complex of loving our enemies, because it's not just agreeing with our enemies. And Jesus gave us example of showing love to different people. Zacchaeus was seeking something in his life; something was missing, and he knew what the need that Zacchaeus needed. The woman at the well. But he also knew the Pharisees were very full of themselves, and they needed to be brought down a notch. Even though there was enemies, he confronted them, and he was harsh at times. But sometimes love has to be confrontational too. So I think there's a whole mix of what it means to love our enemies. It'll be a lot to unpack.
Yeah. I mean, I just really wanted to just start the conversation.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of ways you can go on it, right?
There are,
but at the end of the day, I think this is one of those passages that's really easy to look over. And I think that's why I wanted to bring it up. This is one that, and this is also one that pretty much everybody watching or listening has heard. Pretty much everybody who is watching this or listening to this right now has heard that Jesus has called us to love our enemies and pray for those who are against us. Like, everybody knows that.
Right.
And yet, the day-to-day living out of it, the drop-off is probably huge of people who have heard it and then people who are actually practicing it and living in it. I think that drop-off is probably pretty big.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think is a problem in our Christian culture is that there's a lot of people that talk a big talk about their faith, but they don't love their enemies that are at a distance. Like, it's easy on social media to be critical of groups of people that think differently, that are different than Christians, that have a worldview that's completely different. But when that's their next door neighbor and they're doing life next to them and they speak to them out, putting their trash cans out on Thursday night, and they have conversations in the driveway, they realize those are actually decent people that also, have a love for life and have a family and all of that. And they're not quite as harsh as they are behind a keyboard or any other part. So I think sometimes, I think we as followers of Christ really need to think about each person that is in this world that we come in contact with was created by our God. If we believe in our God, we know they are his creation, and we should treat them the way we would want to be treated by every other person in this world. And so I think it's easy to hate enemies, but it's not as easy when they're right next door and when you realize that they're actual people and you do life with them, you work with them, in your jobs, wherever you go to school. And so I think there's just so much there. I mean, there's so much there. And I think it's a passage, though, like you said, it's another one of those passages that we can easily read over and I agree with that, but then we don't do it. That's what you're calling us to. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, we'll kind of wrap this up. We could keep running in circles. Like you said, we could go very deep on some of these things, but we're kind of just beginning a conversation on this. But I think, we have to change I think the big thing too is I think that's a great point. It's easy to, behind a keyboard, from far away, from a distance, judge people and be against your enemies, whoever's against you. But when you're actually doing life and you're in close contact with those people, you realize that they're people too, and you realize that their lives are actually a lot more similar to yours than you think.
Yes.
Regardless of their political beliefs, regardless of where they are, you realize, oh wow, they're people. They have a family, they have a job, they have life, and they've got to make ends meet just like I do, right? And so I think that's a great point to make. But I think the part I kind of want to end on is this prayer piece, right? Like we can treat people great if we see them in person. They are our neighbor and we talk to them in person. I don't think that like Christians are walking around just being mean to everybody in public. Some of you are, but that's okay. but it's more so this idea of like Jesus says, he almost connects the way to love your enemies is to pray for them. I mean, he's kind of making this connection between the two, right? He's not just saying treat them kind in public because, okay, yeah, I expected that. That's at least the minimum of what we'll do is treat people kind. Yeah. But he's saying in order to love them and really show that you love them and show that you're God's child is what he says is you pray for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big piece that I kind of wanted to end this conversation on is it's really, really easy. I don't know about you, but it's really easy for me to sit down when I'm praying and to pray for those in my life that I love.
100%.
Really, really easy for me to say, God, pray for my wife today. God, I pray for our child who's not here yet. God, I pray for my family. I pray for so-and-so that just talked to me and opened up to me about the situation. That is so easy. Correct. Right? And that's exactly what Jesus is saying here is like you're going to do those things.
Yeah.
But how much harder is it to sit down and say, God, I saw, on social media today that so-and-so said a really hateful thing about Asbury. Right. Lord, I just pray that something changes in their heart. I just pray that they see it from a new perspective. I pray that, like, how much harder is it to do that? Or not even maybe harder, but we don't think about it. Right?
Well,
it doesn't
we don't think about
cross our mind.
And as you're saying this, two things come to my mind. One is that most people that aren't even believers or nominal believers don't mind you praying for them and telling them that you're praying for them. Now, don't tell them you're going to pray for them and not do it. But I've never, I can't remember anybody that I said that is not a believer that has shared something with me and said, I'm going to pray for you. They're like, thank you so much. Like people, whether they're fully a believer in God, they love the fact that you're going to go before God for them. Yeah. Whether they are fully in believing that it matters or not. And that is an encouraging thing to do. And that builds a bridge to someone. So I think we miss opportunities to do that, I think this morning, like I went and got coffee. There's a brand new coffee shop right across the street by Kroger called Sorso. And I went in there yesterday. They opened on Saturday and had a nice conversation with the owners and family-owned business. And I told him I was a pastor here. And I said, I'm really hoping you guys do well and really trying to be encouraging. I could have said, hey, I'm going to pray for your business to do well. I didn't say that and I didn't do that, again, I don't think of them as an enemy, but you know what I'm saying in complimenting being complimentary to what you're talking about and what Jesus said. I think just randomly praying for people that we come in contact in this life, whether we consider them an enemy or enemy of the gospel or just somebody we don't know that well, rather than just keeping it all within our circles, praying for others outside that. I think it's important. Yeah. It's very important. Obviously, Jesus said it's important,
And I believe it's John who says, that we'll be known by our love. Yeah. And so, the rest of the world, these enemies, these people that maybe don't see the world the way that you do, they're not going to know you because of your opinions. They're not going to know you because of your knowledge. They shouldn't, I should say. Yeah. They're not going to, that shouldn't be why they know you or how they know you or what draws them to you. It should be your love. And it should be, and sometimes, it's crazy, sometimes me praying for a said person at a previous time and then seeing them in person changes that conversation. God works in that conversation because I've been praying for them and I've been, asking God to change their heart, to speak through me, to help me. And then by the time I actually get in front of that person, I'm like, I would have never handled it that way. Yeah. I would have never said that or asked about that. But because I've been praying for them, because I've been loving them in that way from afar, like it changes that conversation.
Absolutely, it does.
But yeah, I think Jesus very explicitly is calling us, hey, if you love them and if you say that you are a believer in God, you need to be praying for those who are against you. Pray for those who persecute you. Pray for our broken world. Pray for everything.
Yes.
Right?
If you don't like the president, are you praying for him? Or you don't like the other leaders in our government or anywhere in your life right now? Have you prayed for them? Have you really prayed for them? that God would work in their life. And I think that's just a challenge for all of us. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
One thing, just like a little quick thing from my personal life that I've been trying to change is it was really, really bad at, hey, I'm praying for you. And then the amount of times I actually did was pretty low. So I'm trying not to say that anymore. And what I'll do is I won't text back or I won't respond until I have prayed, and I'll say, hey, I just prayed for you.
Right.
And that's just a simple thing, but in my mind, I'm I'm not going to type out, hey, I'm going to pray for you, because the odds are life's going to continue and things are going to happen, and it's it'll get away from me. But as I open that text, and I sit there for a second and pray in my mind and pray to God by the name, all the things, and then I'm going to respond and say, hey, I just prayed for you.
Yeah.
And that's, that keeps me accountable.
I
because
think
I just let things slip.
A lot of us have been liars over our lifetime about that, but I think that's a great way to handle it in text. I've done some of that same thing, not typing it back until I've done it and doing it in that moment. The other thing in the moment is when it's face-to-face, if it's somebody that's comfortable with that. We had a couple, actually twice yesterday after the services that Sherry and I prayed with people that came to Guest Central for different reasons. And they didn't ask us to, but we said, would you like us to pray with you? And of course they did. Yeah. And they have things going on in their life that are tough. And immediately, rather than saying, hey, I'm going to pray for you this week. You know what? I have 1,000 things going through my mind on a Sunday. And there's a chance that I'm going to forget all about that, that I said that. And I hate that I do that. Yeah. So I've tried, if at all possible, to pray in that moment. It doesn't have to be a long, incredibly emotional, articulate prayer. People aren't looking for that. They're looking for authenticity, people that care. And praying for someone is one of the best ways to show you care. So yeah,
there you go.
Yeah.
We'll end on that note. You got anything else you want to add?
No, man. Just praying that maybe you're not here next Monday.
It's
right?
true.
That would be a good thing for you and Lexi. Excited for that. Excited for this upcoming time. Spring's around the corner. So
I'm ready for warm weather.
Yeah, I'm ready for that. I got baseball. I'm baseball guard, baseball tryouts this week, and it's February, but it's that time of the year. So excited for that.
Alrighty, well, I think that's all we got for today.
Yes,
so,
thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, let us know future conversations, what we'd like to hear, who you would like to have on. Hey, we'll take that. If somebody would like us to sit down with.
Yeah, there's somebody you want me to have on while Mitch is out, let me know. I would, open.
Yeah. But thanks for tuning in, and this has been the In All Things podcast. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the In All Things podcast. Our challenge for you today is to send this episode to one person. Seriously, think of somebody right now that could use this conversation and send it to them. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic ideas, please send them to podcast@sycamorecreek.org, and make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Sycamore Creek Church so that you can always see what's going on in our world. If this conversation helped you at all, make sure you share it, leave a review, and subscribe so that you don't miss out on a single episode. We love you, God loves you, and we'll see you next week on the In All Things podcast.